Blood dripped onto the stone floor of the castle courtyard, and every guard within sight backed away without being told twice. Two massive wolves stood over a fallen soldier, their teeth bared, their eyes glowing with a fury that had not cooled in 100 years. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. The only person who could calm them was miles away on his horse, and until he returned, the courtyard belonged to Fenrir and Sable alone. Ren stood frozen behind a stack of firewood, her arms full of kindling she had been carrying to the kitchen. She had heard the stories since the day she arrived at Blackthorn Castle. The king's wolves let no one near them. Servants who tried to feed them lost fingers. Guards who tried to chain them lost more than that. The wolves belonged to King Ronan Ashgrave, and to him only, bonded by blood and by something older than blood, something the old cook called a curse, and the guards called loyalty. The fallen soldier groaned. He was not dead, but he was hurt, and the wolves would not let anyone come close enough to help him. Ren's chest tightened. She had spent her whole life being told to stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way of anyone bigger and stronger than her. As an Omega, she had learned that lesson before she could even walk properly. But watching a man bleed out on the stones while everyone stood frozen in fear was a lesson she could not make herself learn, no matter how many times life tried to teach it to her. She set down the firewood. "Don't," someone hissed from behind a pillar. It was old Marin, the laundry woman, her face pale as chalk. "Girl, those wolves will tear you apart before you take 3 steps." Ren did not answer. She was already walking. The wolves noticed her instantly. Fenrir's head snapped toward her, his lips curling back over teeth the length of daggers. Sable's growl rolled across the courtyard like distant thunder. Ren kept her hands open at her sides, palms out, and her steps slow and even, the way she used to approach frightened animals back in the village before the war took her home away from her. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I only want to help him." Fenrir took a step toward her, and every guard in the courtyard sucked in a breath at once. Ren did not stop walking. She had nothing left to lose that the world had not already taken, and somehow that made her braver than anyone else standing there. She lowered herself to her knees a few feet from the wounded man, still within reach of both wolves, and kept talking in that same low, steady voice, the kind of voice that asked for nothing and promised nothing, except calm. Sable's growl faded first, then Fenrir's. By the time King Ronan rode back through the gates an hour later, his wolves were lying quietly beside the soldier, who was bandaged and breathing steady, while a small Omega servant knelt between them, humming a tune under her breath. Ronan pulled his horse to a stop so hard the animal reared. He had seen his wolves refuse healers, refuse guards, refuse even his own most trusted advisors. He had never once seen them lie still for a stranger. "Move away from them," he ordered, his voice cutting across the courtyard like a blade. Ren looked up, startled, and scrambled to her feet, bowing her head immediately. "Forgive me, my king." The soldier was hurt, and no one else could reach him. Ronan swung down from his horse, his eyes moving from the calm wolves to the girl now trembling before him. He had ruled for 6 years since his father's death, and in that time, he had learned to read danger in every room he entered. He searched her face for trickery, for the scent of dark magic, for anything that might explain what he was seeing. He found nothing but fear, and underneath the fear, something steadier, something that did not quite belong to an Omega, who had been taught her whole life to disappear. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ren, my king." He studied her a moment longer, then turned to his wolves, half expecting them to finally react the way they always did to strangers, to snap and snarl, and remind everyone why they were feared across the entire northern territory. Instead, Fenrir rose and pressed his massive head gently against Ren's side, as if checking that she was still there. Sable let out a low sound that was almost a whine. Ronan felt something shift in his chest, that he did not have a name for yet. He gave no order, he simply stood there, staring at the impossible sight in front of him, while the whole courtyard held its breath and waited to see what their king would do next. That night, Ren could not sleep. She lay on her thin mattress in the servants' quarters, replaying every second of the afternoon in her mind, certain that at any moment the door would burst open and guards would drag her away for the crime of touching what belonged to the crown. She had broken no written law, but unwritten laws were often the ones that got people killed fastest. Instead, at dawn, a guard arrived with a message. The king wanted to see her. She followed him through corridors she had never been allowed to walk before, past tapestries of old wars and portraits of kings long dead, until she reached the great hall where Ronan sat waiting, his wolves lying at his feet. He did not invite her to sit. He simply studied her, the way a man studies a puzzle he cannot solve. "My wolves have not let a stranger touch them in 100 years, he said finally. "Not since before my grandfather's time. Explain to me why yesterday they let a servant girl sit between them like an old friend." Ren kept her eyes low, her hands folded in front of her. "I don't know, my king. I only spoke to them the way I speak to any frightened creature, softly, without demanding anything from them. They are not frightened creatures. They are the fiercest wolves in the kingdom." "Perhaps," Ren said carefully. "Even the fiercest creatures grow tired of being feared instead of understood." The words hung in the air, bolder than anything an Omega servant should ever say to a king. Ronan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Ren thought she had gone too far. Then Fenrir lifted his head, looked between the two of them, and settled back down with a heavy sigh, as if satisfied that the conversation was going exactly the way it should. Ronan noticed. He always noticed everything his wolves did. And for the first time in years, he found himself curious about someone, instead of suspicious of them, though the two feelings sat close enough together in his chest that he could not yet tell them apart. "You will report to the courtyard each morning," he said at last. "The wolves seem settled around you. I want to understand why, before I decide what to do about it." Ren's heart pounded, torn between relief and dread. Being noticed by a king was never entirely safe, especially not for someone like her. But she thought of the soldier she had helped, of the wolves resting calmly for the first time in 100 years, and she nodded. "Yes, my king." As she left the hall, she did not see the way Ronan watched her go, or the way his hand rested absently on Sable's head, feeling the wolf's heartbeat slow and steady beneath his palm for the first time since he could remember. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself he was simply protecting his kingdom's most valuable creatures from whatever strange magic the girl might carry. He was already wrong, and some part of him already knew it. Word spread through the castle by midday. The servants whispered about the Omega girl who had walked straight up to the king's wolves and lived to tell about it. Some called her brave, others called her cursed, certain that no ordinary person could calm beasts that fierce, without paying some terrible price for it later. Old Maren cornered Ren by the well that evening, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and worry. "You should be careful, girl," she said, glancing over her shoulder, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Attention from the king is not a gift. It is a spotlight, and spotlights burn." "I didn't ask for his attention," Ren said honestly. "I only wanted to help." "I know that. But knowing it won't stop people from talking, and talk in this castle has a way of turning into trouble." Maren softened, placing a weathered hand on Ren's shoulder. "Just watch yourself. Those wolves have never let anyone close before, and there will be people who want to know why they let you close now. Not all of them will ask nicely." Ren carried those words with her as she returned to her small room that night, turning them over and over in her mind, until sleep finally pulled her under. She did not know yet how right Maren would turn out to be, or how far some people in the castle were willing to go to understand, or exploit, the strange new bond between the Omega and the king's wolves. For now, she only knew one thing for certain. Somewhere in the quiet dark of the courtyard, two ancient wolves were sleeping peacefully for the first time in a century, and tomorrow morning, she would see them again. The next morning arrived colder than expected, frost clinging to the courtyard stones as Ren made her way toward the wolves' usual resting spot near the old training yard. She did not know what to expect. Perhaps yesterday had been a fluke, a strange accident brought on by fear and urgency. Perhaps today the wolves would remember exactly what she was supposed to be to them, a stranger, an intruder, prey. But the moment she stepped through the archway, both wolves lifted their heads and rose to meet her, tails low but steady, ears forward instead of flattened in warning. Sable reached her first, pressing a cold nose against her palm, and Ren felt something in her chest loosen that she had not even realized was tight. "Hello again," she murmured, kneeling slowly to their level. "I wasn't sure you would remember me." Fenrir huffed, a sound so close to amusement that Wren nearly laughed out loud. She spent the next hour simply sitting with them, talking quietly about nothing important: the weather, the smell of bread baking somewhere in the kitchens, the way the frost sparkled on the stones like scattered glass. She did not touch them at first, letting them decide when and how close they wanted to be, and slowly, cautiously, they leaned into her space, until Sable's head rested heavily in her lap. She did not notice King Ronan watching from the shadow of the archway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he studied the scene before him. He had come intending to observe from a distance, to gather evidence, to find the trick behind what he had witnessed the day before. Instead, he found himself simply watching, caught somewhere between disbelief and something quieter that he refused to examine too closely. His wolves had guarded him since before he could walk. They had fought beside him in every battle, slept outside his door every night, and never once, in all those years, had he seen them fully relax. Not truly. Not the way they were relaxing now, with their guard down completely, their trust given freely to someone who had nothing to offer them but a soft voice and open hands. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit, and it made him wonder, for the first time in a long while, what exactly his wolves had been missing all these years, and whether he had been missing the same thing without ever realizing it. He stepped out from the shadows, and both wolves turned toward him immediately, tails wagging with the familiar joy they always showed at his arrival. But they did not leave Wren's side. They simply made room, as if there was enough space in their loyalty for both of them now, and Ronan found himself standing at the edge of a courtyard that suddenly felt very different than it had the day before. "They like you," he said, and it was not quite a question. Wren looked up at him, startled to see him standing so close without her having noticed his approach. "It seems that way, my king. They have never liked anyone. Not truly. They tolerate my guards. They obey my commands. But this," he gestured toward Sable's head resting in her lap, toward Fenrir leaning against her shoulder, "this is not tolerance." "Maybe they were only waiting for someone to ask nothing of them," Wren said quietly. "Everyone who comes near them wants something. Obedience, protection, fear. I only wanted to sit with them for a while." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, watching the way the morning light caught the frost on the stones, the way his wolves breathed slow and even, for the first time in longer than he could remember. He thought of his own childhood, of a father who demanded obedience and gave little warmth in return, of a crown that asked everything and offered nothing but duty. He wondered, not for the first time, whether his wolves had learned that same lesson from watching him. "Come to the courtyard each morning," he said finally. "For as long as this arrangement continues to keep them calm." Wren nodded, though something in his voice made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. It was not simply an order. It sounded almost like a request, delivered by a man unused to making them. As she watched him walk away, his wolves trailing reluctantly behind him, she found herself wondering about the king behind the crown, the man who ruled with such iron control, yet seemed almost lost, standing in his own courtyard, watching creatures he had known his whole life behave like strangers to him. She did not yet understand how deeply that loneliness ran, or how much it would come to matter to both of them in the days ahead. She only knew that something in Blackthorn Castle had shifted, quietly and completely, the moment she knelt beside two wolves who had not let anyone close in 100 years, and that there would be no going back to the way things had been before. A sharp knock rattled the servants' quarters before the sun had fully risen, and Wren shot upright, heart pounding, certain something had gone wrong overnight. But it was only a young page, sent to fetch her earlier than usual, his face flushed from running. "The wolves won't settle," he said breathlessly. "Captain Aldrich tried to move them from the west wall, and Sable nearly took his arm off. The king is asking for you." Wren was on her feet, and dressed within minutes, her mind racing as she hurried through the corridors. 3 days had passed since she first knelt between the wolves in the courtyard, and in that short time, something had changed in the rhythm of the castle. The wolves no longer tolerated distance from her easily. If she was late, if she skipped even a single morning, they grew restless, pacing the walls, refusing food, snapping at guards who came too close. She found them exactly where the page described, backed against the western wall, hackles raised, teeth bared at a group of guards who kept their spears low but ready. Captain Aldrich stood at the front, cradling his forearm, blood seeping through his sleeve where Sable's teeth had grazed him. "Ren," Ronan's voice cut through the tension the moment he spotted her arriving. He stood near the wolves, but not too close, his own hands raised in a calming gesture that clearly was not working. "They will not let anyone approach. Not even me." That last part struck Ren harder than she expected. Fenrir and Sable had always deferred to Ronan, even in their wildest moments. Seeing them refuse him now, growling low and steady even as he spoke to them gently, told her something important was happening beneath the surface of their behavior. She walked forward slowly, the way she always did, and both wolves turned toward her instantly. Their growls did not stop, but their attention shifted entirely to her, as if she were the only person in the courtyard who mattered. "What happened?" she asked softly, kneeling in front of them despite Captain Aldrich's sharp intake of breath behind her. "They woke agitated," Ronan said. "Before dawn. Nothing seemed wrong. No threat, no intruder. Yet they have been like this for over an hour." Ren studied the wolves carefully. Their eyes were not fixed on the guards, or even fully on Ronan. They kept glancing toward the eastern gate, ears pinned, bodies tense in a way that looked less like aggression and more like fear. She had seen this before, in the village dogs back home, whenever a storm approached from far off, long before anyone else could sense it coming. "I don't think they're being aggressive," she said slowly. "I think they're afraid of something. Something none of us can see yet." Ronan's expression sharpened. "Afraid of what?" "I don't know. But animals sense danger long before people do. If they're this unsettled, something is coming." Captain Aldrich scoffed, despite his injury. "With respect, my king, they are simply wild beasts having a difficult morning. We should chain them until they calm down." The moment the word chain left his mouth, both wolves snarled so violently that Aldrich stumbled backward, and even Ronan flinched at the sound. Ren placed a steady hand on Fenrir's shoulder, and slowly, gradually, the growling eased into something quieter, though the tension in his body never fully left. "No chains," Ronan said firmly, silencing any further argument. "Clear the courtyard. Everyone but Ren." The guards filed out reluctantly, casting uneasy glances over their shoulders as they went. Once the courtyard emptied, Ronan crouched down beside Ren, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cold morning air. It was the closest he had ever been to her, and something about it made her pulse quicken in a way she quickly tried to ignore. "Tell me honestly," he said, his voice quieter now, meant only for her. "Do you believe something is truly wrong, or are they simply testing new boundaries because you've changed how they behave?" Ren considered the question carefully before answering. She respected that he asked instead of assumed, a small thing that told her more about him than any of the rumors she had heard from the other servants. "I think both things can be true," she said. "They trust me now in a way they haven't trusted anyone outside of you. That trust might be making them more sensitive, more willing to show fear instead of hiding it behind aggression. But I also think their instincts are rarely wrong. If they sense danger, my king, I would take it seriously." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, watching his wolves settle slightly under Ren's touch, their breathing slowing bit by bit. He thought of every report from his scouts over the past week, small things he had dismissed as unrelated, unusual movement near the eastern border, a merchant caravan that never arrived at its destination, whispers of a rival lord traveling with more guards than any peaceful visit required. "Lord Cassian Wolf is due to arrive within the week," he said finally, almost to himself, "for what he calls a diplomatic visit." Ren looked up at him, something cold settling in her stomach at the mention of the name, though she could not have explained why. "You don't trust him." "I have never trusted him, but my council insists his support matters for the eastern trade routes, and I cannot refuse him without cause." Ronan's jaw tightened. Perhaps my wolves sense something my council refuses to see. The two of them sat in silence for a while, the only sound the slow, steady breathing of the wolves finally calming between them. Ren was acutely aware of how close Ronan sat, of the way his presence filled the space around her, without demanding anything from her. It was different from every other interaction she'd had with someone of power. He did not order her to fix the situation. He simply sat with her, working through the problem together, as if her opinion genuinely mattered to him. "Thank you," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "for coming so quickly, for understanding them when no one else can." Ren felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly focused her attention back on Sable's fur beneath her fingers. They're not hard to understand, my king. They only want honesty. I imagine that's true of most creatures. Something flickered across Ronan's face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Most creatures, he repeated softly, and perhaps most people as well. Over the following days, the wolves' unease did not fully fade, but it grew manageable whenever Ren was near, enough that the castle returned to something resembling its normal rhythm. She found herself spending more time in the courtyard than in the kitchens now, an arrangement that earned her both curious glances and quiet resentment from other servants who whispered about favoritism behind her back. Old Marin found her scrubbing pots late one evening, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. You look tired, girl. The wolves barely sleep unless I'm nearby, Ren admitted. I don't mind it, but it leaves little time for anything else. Marin studied her carefully, concern etched into the lines of her weathered face. Careful what you allow yourself to become responsible for. Wolves are not the only ones who might come to depend on you, and not everyone in this castle wishes you well for it. Ren thought of Captain Aldrich's cold glare after Sable's teeth had grazed his arm, of the whispers that followed her through the corridors, of the strange way certain nobles now watched her whenever she crossed their paths. She thought too of Ronan, of the quiet moments they had begun sharing in the courtyard each morning, moments that felt increasingly like something more than duty required of either of them. I know, she said softly. I'll be careful. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was already too late for careful. The wolves' instincts had proven right about far more than the danger approaching from the east. Something was shifting inside the castle walls, quiet and slow, and Ren was beginning to understand that she stood directly at the center of it, whether she had chosen that position or not. 3 nights before Lord Cassian Wolf's arrival, Ren woke to the sound of scratching at her window. She sat up sharply, pulse racing, before realizing it was Fenrir, somehow having slipped away from the courtyard and found his way to the narrow servants' wing. He paced outside her door until she opened it, then pressed against her legs insistently, nudging her toward the corridor. What is it? She whispered, following him through the sleeping castle, careful to avoid the patrolling guards. He led her all the way to the eastern battlements, where Sable already waited, both wolves staring out into the darkness beyond the castle walls, with an intensity that made the hair on Ren's arms rise. She followed their gaze, and saw nothing at first, only the distant tree line and the faint glow of stars. Then, barely visible, a cluster of torchlight flickered somewhere far beyond the border, moving steadily closer, under cover of night. Her breath caught. Whoever was traveling that road clearly did not want to be seen arriving. She turned to run for the guards, but Fenrir blocked her path gently, whining low in his throat, and she understood immediately. He wanted her to fetch Ronan directly, not the guards, not the captain, him alone. Ren ran through the dark corridors faster than she ever had in her life, her heart hammering against her ribs, the wolves' warning echoing in her mind. Whatever was approaching Blackthorn Castle under the cover of darkness, she had a growing certainty that it was connected to Lord Cassian Wolf, and that the danger the wolves had sensed days earlier had finally arrived at their doorstep. Ronan was already awake when Ren burst into his chambers, standing by the window with a candle in hand, as if some part of him had also sensed that something was wrong that night. He did not scold her for entering unannounced. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "Show me," he said, grabbing his coat from the chair. Together they climbed the narrow stairs to the eastern battlements, where the wolves still stood, watching the distant torchlight, now noticeably closer than before. Ronan's expression hardened as he studied the movement, counting the flickering lights with the practiced eye of a man who had led armies since he was barely more than a boy. "Too many for a simple messenger," he said quietly, "and too quiet for an honest approach. Whoever they are, they don't want to be noticed until they're close enough to matter." "Lord Cassian?" Ren asked. "His visit isn't for 3 more days, and he would never travel without banners announcing his arrival for miles. He enjoys being seen." Ronan's jaw tightened. "This is something else, or someone testing our defenses ahead of his arrival." He called for Captain Aldrich immediately, and within minutes, the battlements filled with quiet, controlled movement, guards positioning themselves along the wall without torches to give away their readiness. Ren stayed back with the wolves, watching the tension ripple through the castle like a held breath, and found herself surprised by how naturally she had begun to read these situations, how much she had absorbed simply by staying close to Ronan and his wolves these past days. The torchlight stopped roughly a quarter-mile from the castle walls, and after a long, tense silence, a single rider broke away from the group and approached alone, hands raised, no weapon visible. Captain Aldrich allowed him through the gate, under heavy guard, and the man dropped to one knee the moment he reached the courtyard, breathless and pale. "My king," he gasped, "forgive the hour. I ride ahead of Lord Cassian's party with urgent news. There has been an attack on the southern trade route. Bandits, or something worse. 6 guards dead, the cargo taken." Ronan's expression did not change, but Ren, standing close enough to see the subtle tension in his shoulders, understood the weight behind his stillness. "What cargo?" The messenger hesitated, glancing nervously toward the wolves before answering. "Weapons, my king. Meant for the northern garrisons. Someone knew the route, knew the timing exactly." A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. Ren felt Fenrir press closer against her side, his growl a low rumble she felt more than heard. "Lord Cassian sends this warning ahead of his own arrival. Out of loyalty," the messenger continued quickly, clearly rehearsed. "He wished you to know, before he reaches the castle himself." Ronan studied the man for a long moment, something calculating and cold settling behind his eyes. "Convenient," he said finally, "that Lord Cassian's men happened to discover this attack so precisely, and that he sends word of it just days before his own visit, when weapons meant for my garrisons have gone missing." The messenger paled further, but said nothing, clearly unprepared for suspicion instead of gratitude. Ronan dismissed him to the guest quarters under careful watch, and turned back toward the battlements, his mind clearly working through implications Ren could not fully follow. "You think he's involved?" she said quietly, once they were alone again with the wolves. "I think it is a very useful coincidence for a man seeking greater influence over the northern trade routes, to have those routes suddenly become unsafe, just before he arrives, offering his own guards as protection." Ronan's voice was tight with barely restrained anger. "And I think my wolves sensed something was wrong, long before any messenger arrived to explain it." Ren looked down at Fenrir and Sable, both still tense, still watching the darkness beyond the walls, even now that the immediate threat had passed. "What will you do?" "Nothing. Yet. I need proof, before I can accuse a lord as powerful as Cassian Wolf of orchestrating an attack on my own supply lines. Until then, I welcome him as planned, and I watch very, very carefully." He turned to look at her directly, his expression softening slightly. "And I trust my wolves' instincts more than I trust any report my council brings me, which means, from now on, I need you close. Not only for their comfort, but for their warning." The following days passed in a strange, tense rhythm. Ren spent her mornings in the courtyard as always, but now Ronan joined her more often than not, discussing quietly the preparations being made for Lord Cassian's arrival, watching his wolves for any further signs of unease. Ren found herself growing more comfortable in his presence, the careful formality between them slowly softening into something that felt, dangerously, like genuine companionship. "You've never told me where you came from," Ronan said one morning, watching her braid small bits of dried lavender into Sable's fur, a habit she had developed to keep the wolf calm during moments of stress. "There isn't much to tell," Ren said, keeping her eyes on her work. "My village was destroyed in the border wars when I was young. I had no pack, no family left to claim me. I was passed between households doing whatever work would keep me fed, until I ended up here. That sounds like a difficult life. It taught me things," she said simply. "How to read people, how to stay quiet when quiet keeps you safe, how to notice fear before it turns into something worse, in animals and in people both." She glanced up at him then, something steady and unflinching in her gaze despite the difference in their stations. "It taught me that most creatures aren't dangerous because they're cruel. They're dangerous because they're frightened, and no one ever taught them anything different." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "My father believed strength meant never showing weakness, never showing fear, never showing warmth, not even to the creatures who protected him his entire life." He glanced down at his wolves, resting peacefully at Ren's feet. "I think, perhaps, I learned that lesson from him more thoroughly than I realized, until now." The admission hung between them, quiet and unexpected, and Ren felt something shift in her chest that she quickly tried to push aside. He was a king. She was an Omega servant with no family, no name worth mentioning, no future beyond whatever work kept her fed. Whatever strange companionship had grown between them in this courtyard could never be more than that, and she reminded herself of this fact firmly, even as her heart refused entirely to listen. 2 days before Lord Cassian's arrival, the wolves' unease returned sharply, worse than before. This time, it was not distant torchlight that unsettled them, but something closer, something inside the castle walls itself. Ren noticed it first during the evening meal, both wolves suddenly rising from their resting spot near the kitchens, hackles raised, noses working the air with sharp, urgent focus. She followed them as they moved swiftly through the servants' corridors, past the kitchens, past the laundry rooms, until they stopped outside a storage room rarely used, tucked away in the castle's oldest wing. Both wolves scratched at the door insistently, growling low. Ren hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open, and what she found inside made her blood run cold. Crates of weapons, clearly not belonging to the castle's own armory, stamped with a symbol she did not recognize, hidden beneath old furniture and discarded tapestries. Someone had smuggled them into the castle itself and hidden them well enough that no ordinary search would have found them. She ran for Ronan immediately, the wolves close at her heels, understanding now with absolute certainty that whatever danger Lord Cassian Wolf represented, it had already found its way inside Blackthorn Castle's walls, waiting silently for the right moment to be used. Ronan stood in the storage room for a long time, staring at the crates of hidden weapons without saying a word. Captain Aldrich had been summoned along with 2 of his most trusted guards, and the small room felt crowded with tension as they waited for the king's judgment. "These are not our markings," Aldrich said finally, running his fingers along the strange symbol burned into the wood. "I don't recognize this crest at all." "I do," Ronan said quietly. "It belongs to a mercenary company, operating out of the eastern provinces, men who work for whoever pays the most, and ask no questions about why." Ren watched him carefully, noting the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way his jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "You believe Lord Cassian hired them. I believe someone wanted these weapons here, hidden, ready to be used at a moment of their choosing. And I believe that someone is arriving at my gates in 2 days, offering friendship with one hand, while hiding a knife behind his back with the other." Ronan turned to Aldrich. "Search the entire castle, quietly. I want to know if there are more hidden rooms like this one before Lord Cassian's arrival." The search took the rest of the night and most of the following day, guards moving carefully through every unused corner of the castle, under the pretense of routine maintenance. They found no additional weapons, but the discovery left everyone on edge, uncertain who among the staff might have helped smuggle the crates inside, without anyone noticing. Ren found herself watching the other servants differently now, wondering which of them might have been paid to look the other way, which of them might still be reporting details of the castle's defenses to someone outside its walls. It was an uncomfortable feeling, suspicion settling over a place that had never felt entirely safe to her, but had at least felt familiar. That evening, Ronan found her alone in the courtyard, sitting quietly with the wolves as the sun set behind the mountains. He looked exhausted, the weight of the discovery clearly pressing down on him harder than he wanted to show. "You should be resting," Ren said gently, as he lowered himself down beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I find it difficult to rest, knowing what I know now." He rubbed a hand across his face, weariness evident in every line of his expression. "My father built alliances with careful, patient hands. I have spent 6 years trying to hold those same alliances together, and now I discover one of my most valuable allies may be planning something against me from within my own walls. What will you do when he arrives?" "Exactly what I planned before. Welcome him, smile, offer him wine and comfortable rooms." Ronan's voice hardened. "And watch every single move he makes, waiting for him to reveal himself." Ren considered this for a moment. "The wolves will know before any of us do, if he means harm. They sensed the weapons before we ever found them." Ronan turned to look at her then, something warm and grateful passing across his tired features. "Yes, and that is precisely why I need you beside me when he arrives. Not simply managing the wolves, but reading whatever they sense that I might otherwise miss. I'm only a servant, my king. It might look strange, having me present during a diplomatic visit." You are the only person my wolves have trusted in 100 years, Ronan said firmly. That makes you far more than only a servant, whatever titles the castle chooses to give you. He paused, something more vulnerable entering his voice. And selfishly, I find I would rather have you nearby, regardless of what the wolves need. Your presence has become steadying these past weeks, more than I expected it to be. The admission hung in the cooling evening air between them, and Ren felt her heart stumble over itself, uncertain how to respond to words that felt far too personal for a king to speak to a servant girl. She glanced down at Fenrir and Sable, both watching the exchange, with an alertness that suggested they understood every word passing between their two favorite humans. I'm glad to be steadying, my king, she said carefully, choosing her words with as much caution as she could manage, while her pulse raced beneath her calm exterior. Ronan smiled faintly, the expression transforming his tired face into something younger, softer than the guarded king she usually saw. Perhaps, when we are alone like this, you might simply call me Ronan. Ren's breath caught. It was a small thing, a single word, yet it felt enormous. A boundary crossed that could not easily be uncrossed once spoken. That would not be appropriate, she managed finally, though her voice lacked the conviction the words demanded. Perhaps not, Ronan agreed softly, his eyes never leaving hers, but I find myself wanting it regardless. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance between them, though both were acutely aware of how little distance remained. The wolves shifted closer around them, as if sensing the fragile, uncertain moment stretching between their two humans, content simply to be near both people they had come to love in their own fierce, quiet way. It was Ren who finally broke the silence, standing abruptly and putting proper distance between them once more. It grows late, my king. I should return to my quarters before I'm missed. Ronan nodded, though something in his expression suggested he understood exactly why she had retreated, and did not entirely blame her for it. Of course. Sleep well, Ren. She hurried away through the darkening courtyard, her heart pounding with a confusion she did not know how to untangle. Whatever was growing between them defied every rule she had been taught about her place in the world, about the impossible distance between a king and an Omega with nothing to offer but a steady hand with frightened animals. Yet the memory of his voice, soft and honest in a way she had never expected from someone in his position, followed her all the way back to her narrow bed, refusing to let her rest easily. 2 days later, Lord Cassian Wolf arrived at Blackthorn Castle exactly as expected, banners flying, a procession of finely dressed guards trailing behind his ornate carriage. He was a tall man with sharp, calculating eyes, and a smile that never quite reached them, dressed in rich furs despite the mild weather, clearly a man who enjoyed the appearance of wealth as much as wealth itself. Ren watched from a respectful distance as Ronan greeted him in the courtyard, the two men exchanging the careful, practiced pleasantries of rulers who trusted each other far less than their smiles suggested. Fenrir and Sable stood close to Ronan's sides, unusually still, their eyes fixed on Lord Cassian, with an intensity that made several of his guards visibly uneasy. Your wolves seem tense, King Ronan, Cassian observed, his tone light but his eyes sharp as he studied the two massive creatures. I hope my arrival hasn't unsettled them. They are simply cautious around strangers, Ronan replied smoothly, though Ren caught the subtle warning in his tone that Lord Cassian likely missed entirely. A trait I find valuable in creatures meant to protect a kingdom. Cassian's smile widened slightly, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. Wisdom indeed. One can never be too cautious these days, what with bandits growing bolder along our trade routes. His gaze drifted briefly toward Ren, standing near the wolves, and something in his expression sharpened with unmistakable interest. And who is this? I don't recall an Omega handler among your usual staff. A recent addition, Ronan said, his voice carefully neutral. She has a gift, with animals. How fascinating. Cassian's attention lingered on Ren a moment longer than felt comfortable, and she resisted the urge to step back under the weight of his scrutiny. I have heard rumors, actually, traveling through your territories. Stories of wolves who suddenly permit themselves to be touched, after 100 years of refusing everyone but their king. Strange, don't you think, how quickly things can change? The comment carried an edge beneath its polite surface, and Ren felt Fenrir's body tense beside her, a low growl building in his throat that she quickly soothed with a steady hand against his fur. Ronan's expression remained pleasant, but Ren, having spent weeks learning to read him, recognized the sharp wariness hidden beneath his calm exterior. "People enjoy stories more than truth, most days," Ronan said smoothly. "Come, Lord Cassian. Let us discuss the Eastern trade routes properly, over wine, rather than courtyard gossip." As the two men moved toward the Great Hall, guards and attendants trailing behind them, Ren remained in the courtyard with the wolves, her heart still pounding from the weight of Lord Cassian's gaze. Something about the way he had looked at her, calculating and far too interested, left her deeply unsettled, as if he already understood exactly how valuable she had become to the king, and precisely how that value might be used against him. She had a growing certainty that Lord Cassian Wolf's visit was only the beginning of something far more dangerous than any of them had yet realized, and that the weapons hidden within the castle walls were only the first piece of a much larger, more carefully constructed plan. The Great Hall buzzed with careful conversation that evening. Nobles and advisors gathered for the formal dinner, welcoming Lord Cassian Wolf to Blackthorn Castle. Ren was not meant to attend such gatherings, but Ronan had insisted she remain nearby, seated at a small table near the wolves' resting spot along the wall, close enough to observe everything, while remaining technically apart from the noble guests. She watched Lord Cassian move through the hall with practiced charm, laughing at jokes that did not seem particularly funny, complimenting dishes he barely touched, all while his sharp eyes catalogued every detail of the castle around him. He asked pointed questions about the garrison's strength, about trade agreements with neighboring territories, about the loyalty of Ronan's council members, questions dressed carefully as simple curiosity, but carrying an undertone of calculation that made Ren's skin prickle with unease. "He watches everything," she murmured to Fenrir, who lay beside her chair, his golden eyes fixed unblinkingly on the visiting lord across the hall, like he's counting every guard, every exit, every weakness. Fenrir's ears flattened slightly, a low sound rumbling in his chest that only Ren could hear over the noise of the hall. Partway through the meal, Lord Cassian rose from his seat, raising his goblet toward Ronan with an expression of practiced warmth. "A toast," he announced, drawing the attention of the entire hall, "to King Ronan Ashgrave, whose strength and wisdom have kept these northern territories safe and prosperous. May our alliance continue to flourish for many years to come." The hall echoed with polite applause, though Ren noticed several of Ronan's older advisors exchanging uneasy glances, clearly as suspicious of Cassian's motives as their king was. Ronan raised his own goblet in return, his expression perfectly composed, though Ren had learned to see the careful control beneath his calm exterior. "To continued alliance," Ronan replied smoothly, "built on honesty between friends." The slight emphasis on the word honesty was subtle enough that most of the hall missed it entirely, but Ren saw Lord Cassian's smile flicker for just a moment, something colder passing behind his eyes, before the practiced charm slid back into place. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it confirmed everything Ren had already suspected. Whatever alliance existed between these two men, it was built on layers of careful deception, each one watching the other for the first sign of weakness. Later that night, after the guests had retired to their chambers, and the great hall had emptied, Ren found Ronan standing alone on the eastern battlements, staring out at the darkened landscape beyond the castle walls. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, uncertain whether to disturb him, before Fenrir trotted ahead of her anyway, pressing against Ronan's legs and announcing her presence. "I thought you might have retired for the evening," Ronan said without turning, though something in his voice suggested he was glad for the company. "I couldn't sleep, too much to think about." Ren moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "He's dangerous, more than I expected. He always has been. My father warned me about Cassian Wolf before he died, told me never to trust a man who smiles more than he speaks the truth." Ronan's hands gripped the stone railing tightly. "I foolishly believed I could manage him, keep him useful, without giving him enough power to become a real threat. I'm beginning to think I underestimated him badly." "What did you learn tonight?" from his questions. "Enough to worry me considerably. He knows more about my garrison's strength than any ally should, and he asked far too many questions about which of my advisors might be persuaded to see things his way, given the right incentive." Ronan exhaled slowly, frustration evident in the tight line of his shoulders. "I fear he isn't simply seeking greater trade influence. I fear he wants my throne itself, and has been patiently building toward taking it for longer than I realized." Ren absorbed this information carefully, understanding now the full weight of what they were facing. The weapons hidden in the castle, you think they're meant for an uprising? I think it's possible someone inside these walls has already been persuaded to support him, quietly, in exchange for promises of power once he takes control. Ronan turned to look at her then, his expression troubled in the moonlight, which means I no longer know who among my own people I can fully trust. You can trust me, Ren said immediately, the words leaving her before she had fully considered them, though she meant every syllable completely. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, softening the tired lines of worry etched across his face. I know, he said quietly. You are, perhaps, the only person within these walls I trust completely anymore, which feels both strange and remarkably clear, all at once. The admission settled between them, heavy with meaning neither of them fully voiced aloud. Ren felt the pull of him standing so close, the warmth of his presence a stark contrast to the cold uncertainty settling over the castle since Lord Cassian's arrival. She wondered, not for the first time, what exactly was growing between them, and whether either of them had the luxury of exploring it, while a hidden threat gathered strength somewhere within their own walls. We should find proof, she said finally, forcing her thoughts back toward the immediate danger, rather than the confusing pull of her own feelings. Before he leaves, something concrete enough to act against him. Ronan nodded, though frustration remained evident in his expression. Proof is difficult to gather against a man as careful as Cassian Wolf. He will have left nothing obvious behind, nothing that could be traced directly back to him. Then we watch carefully, and we let the wolves guide us toward whatever he thinks he's hidden well enough to escape notice. Ren glanced down at Fenrir, still pressed close against Ronan's legs, his golden eyes alert even in the quiet darkness. They found the weapons before any of your guards did. I trust they'll find whatever comes next as well. Over the following 2 days, Ren and the wolves shadowed Lord Cassian's movements as discreetly as possible, watching for any sign of secretive meetings, any unusual behavior from the castle staff around him. Cassian, for his part, seemed entirely focused on his official business, spending hours in council meetings, discussing trade agreements, touring the castle's gardens with polite interest, behaving every bit the honorable ally he claimed to be. But Ren noticed small things others might have missed. The way certain guards seemed unusually attentive to Cassian's needs, more familiar with him than a simple visiting lord should warrant. The way one of Ronan's younger council members, a nobleman named Edric Thorne, seemed to avoid meeting the king's eyes whenever Cassian's name arose in conversation. The way messages arrived for Cassian at odd hours, delivered by servants who did not belong to his traveling party. She reported each observation to Ronan quietly, piece by piece, watching his expression grow increasingly grim as the picture assembled itself before them. By the 3rd day, he had ordered quiet surveillance on Edric Thorne specifically, suspecting the young nobleman might be the weak link Cassian had exploited to gain access within the castle walls. The confirmation came on the 4th night, when Ren followed Fenrir through the darkened gardens and discovered Edric Thorne meeting secretly with one of Cassian's most trusted guards, exchanging a small leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coin. She stayed hidden in the shadows, straining to catch their whispered conversation, and what she overheard confirmed every fear Ronan had voiced on the battlements 2 nights before. Lord Cassian was not simply seeking greater trade influence. He was planning to move against the throne itself, using the hidden weapons and Edric's inside knowledge of the castle's defenses to strike at a moment of his choosing, likely during some future gathering when Ronan's guard would be lowest and the element of surprise would work most effectively in his favor. Ren slipped away before either man noticed her presence, her heart pounding as she raced back through the darkened corridors to find Ronan, understanding now with terrible clarity that the danger facing Blackthorn Castle was far greater and far more imminent than any of them had realized. Ronan listened to Ren's account in complete silence, his expression darkening with every detail she recounted about the exchange between Edric Thorne and Cassian's guard. When she finished, he sat heavily in the chair by his study window, running a hand through his hair, the weight of betrayal settling visibly across his shoulders. Edric's family has served mine for 3 generations, he said quietly. His grandfather fought beside my grandfather. I trusted him with details about our garrison strength that few others knew. I'm sorry, Ren said softly, understanding how deeply this particular betrayal cut. beyond simple political danger, and into something far more personal. Don't be sorry. Be glad you found it, before it cost me everything I've worked to protect. Ronan's voice hardened with resolve. I need to move carefully now. If I confront Edric directly, Cassian will know his plan has been discovered, and he may accelerate whatever timeline he's working toward. I need more information before I act. What do you need me to do? Ronan looked at her then, something conflicted passing across his features. I need you to continue watching, though I hate asking it of you. If Cassian suspects for even a moment that you're more than simply a wolf handler, the danger to you becomes considerable. I understand the risk, Ren said firmly. But I won't stop now, not when we're finally close to understanding exactly what he's planning. Ronan studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between his need for information and his growing concern for her safety. An internal conflict Ren was beginning to recognize whenever the topic of her safety arose between them. Finally he nodded, though reluctance remained evident in his expression. Stay close to the wolves at all times, he said. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, come to me immediately. Promise me that. I promise, Ren said, and meant it completely. Over the following days, the castle settled into an uneasy rhythm, everyone playing their careful roles, while the true nature of the danger simmered beneath the surface. Lord Cassian continued his diplomatic visit as though nothing were amiss, discussing trade agreements and offering generous gifts, his charm never wavering, despite the quiet suspicion now surrounding him. Ren watched Edric Thorne carefully whenever their paths crossed, noting the nervous energy beneath his carefully maintained composure, the way his eyes darted toward exits whenever conversations grew too pointed. He clearly understood the risk he was taking, though whatever Cassian had promised him seemed sufficient to keep him committed to the dangerous path he had chosen. It was during a quiet evening walk through the castle gardens that Ren finally understood the full scope of what was at stake. She had gone to collect herbs for the wolves' evening meal, a task that had become routine over the past weeks, when she overheard raised voices coming from behind a hedge of climbing roses. She recognized Edric's voice immediately, tight with barely controlled panic. This is moving too quickly, he was saying. I agreed to provide information, not to help smuggle an army's worth of weapons into the castle itself. You agreed to help Lord Cassian achieve what he desires, in exchange for the position he promised you once the throne changes hands, came the reply, cold and unfamiliar, belonging to one of Cassian's senior guards. Backing out now is not an option available to you. The king suspects something. I've seen it in his eyes these past days. Then we simply need to move faster than his suspicions can catch up to us. A pause, heavy with implication. There is a gathering planned in 3 days, is there not? A visit from the neighboring territories to discuss the spring trade agreements? Ren's blood ran cold. She knew exactly the gathering they referenced, a large diplomatic meeting Ronan had been preparing for weeks, expecting representatives from several neighboring kingdoms to attend. The castle would be filled with visiting nobles and their guards, security stretched thin trying to accommodate so many important guests at once. That would be the perfect moment, the guard continued. Confusion, crowds, guards focused on protecting visiting dignitaries, rather than watching for threats from within. Lord Cassian's men, already stationed throughout the castle, under the guise of his own protection detail, would have every opportunity needed. Ren pressed herself further into the shadows, hardly daring to breathe, as the two men continued discussing details of a plan that would see Ronan overthrown, likely killed, during a gathering meant to celebrate peace and cooperation between kingdoms. She waited until they finally parted ways, before slipping quietly from the garden, her mind racing through everything she had just learned. She found Ronan in his study, poring over trade documents with an exhausted expression, and the moment he saw her face, he set down his papers immediately, recognizing the urgency written across her features. What happened? Ren recounted everything she had overheard, watching Ronan's expression shift from concern to cold, controlled fury, as the full scope of the plan became clear. 3 days. They had only 3 days to prepare a defense against a threat that had been carefully constructed within his own castle walls for weeks, possibly months, before anyone had noticed. The gathering must still happen, Ronan said finally, his voice steady, despite the danger now clearly facing him. Canceling it would only warn Cassian that we know his plan, and he would simply find another opportunity. perhaps one we won't discover in time to prepare for. Then we prepare for this one carefully, Ren said. Increase security in ways that don't draw obvious attention. Position your most trusted guards where they'll do the most good, and watch Edric and Cassian's men closely, so we know the moment they make their move. Ronan looked at her with something like awe mixed into his exhausted relief. You've become remarkably skilled at this, for someone who arrived at this castle simply hoping to survive. I've had good reason to learn quickly, Ren said, managing a small, tired smile despite the gravity of their situation. And excellent teachers, in their own way. She glanced down at Fenrir, who had followed her into the study, and now lay watchfully near the door, ever alert to danger, even in the quiet comfort of Ronan's private chambers. Ronan called a private council meeting the following morning, including only his most trusted advisors, deliberately excluding Edric Thorne from the gathering, under the pretense of an unrelated diplomatic errand that kept him occupied elsewhere in the castle. Together, they began constructing a careful plan, positioning loyal guards throughout the castle, in ways that would appear routine to any outside observer, while actually creating a strong defensive network, capable of responding quickly, should Cassian's men make their move. Ren's role remained central to the plan, her connection to the wolves proving invaluable for monitoring movement throughout the castle during the chaos of the upcoming gathering. Fenrir and Sable would patrol key areas, their heightened senses able to detect threats long before human guards might notice anything amiss, with Ren serving as the crucial link, capable of interpreting their warnings and relaying them quickly to Ronan's trusted circle. As the day of the gathering approached, tension within the castle grew thick enough to feel physically present in every corridor. Every quiet conversation between guards who understood the true stakes of what was coming. Ren found herself spending long hours with the wolves, partly for their comfort during the mounting stress, partly because their steady presence had become her own source of comfort as the danger drew closer. On the evening before the gathering, Ronan found her in the courtyard one final time, both of them acutely aware of how much could go wrong the following day, how many lives hung in the balance of a plan built quickly around a betrayal none of them had seen coming until it was nearly too late. Whatever happens tomorrow, Ronan said quietly, sitting close beside her with the wolves settled protectively around them both. I want you to know that these past weeks, having you here, have changed something in me I didn't realize needed changing. Ren looked at him in the fading evening light, her heart aching with the weight of everything unspoken between them, everything that felt both impossible and inevitable at once. Whatever happens tomorrow, she echoed softly. I'm glad I chose to walk toward your wolves, instead of staying hidden behind that stack of firewood. Ronan reached out then, his hand finding hers in the quiet darkness, and for the first time, neither of them pulled away from the connection, both understanding that tomorrow would bring danger neither could fully predict, and that whatever they had built together in this courtyard deserved acknowledgement before the uncertainty of the coming day arrived to test everything they had come to mean to each other. The morning of the gathering arrived bright and deceptively peaceful, the castle grounds bustling with preparation, as servants scurried to arrange banquet tables, hang decorative banners, and welcome the first of many visiting dignitaries through the main gates. To any outside observer, Blackthorn Castle appeared exactly as it should, a proud northern stronghold hosting an important diplomatic gathering with all the pomp and ceremony such an occasion demanded. Ren moved through the preparations with careful purpose, her outward calm hiding the tight knot of anxiety coiled in her stomach. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every detail of the plan they had constructed, searching for weaknesses, for anything they might have overlooked in their rush to prepare against a threat that could strike from any direction. Fenrir and Sable stayed close beside her as she made her rounds through the castle, ostensibly settling them into their usual resting spot near the courtyard, though in truth, she was using the opportunity to survey the positions of Ronan's hidden guards, confirming everything remained in place, according to their careful plan. By midday, the great hall filled with visiting nobles from 3 neighboring territories, their guards and attendants creating exactly the kind of crowded confusion that Cassian's men had identified as their ideal opportunity. Ren watched from her position near the wolves, her senses heightened, cataloging every unfamiliar face, every guard whose attention seemed focused on something other than simple ceremonial duty. She spotted Cassian's senior guard first, the same cold voice she had overheard in the garden days before, positioned near a side entrance, that led toward the castle's private wing, exactly where Ronan would eventually retreat for private discussions with the most important visiting dignitaries. It was a smart choice, isolated enough to avoid witnesses, close enough to strike quickly once the opportunity presented itself. She caught Ronan's eye across the crowded hall, a subtle nod passing between them that confirmed she had identified a threat. Ronan's expression remained perfectly composed as he continued his gracious greetings to arriving nobles. Though Ren knew the message had registered clearly, the careful plan they had built together now shifting into motion. The afternoon progressed with agonizing slowness, formal introductions giving way to discussions of trade agreements, careful diplomatic dances between representatives who each wanted the best possible terms for their own territories. Lord Cassian played his role perfectly throughout, charming and engaged, offering generous concessions that painted him as the most reasonable and trustworthy ally in the room, exactly the reputation he would need intact once his true intentions were revealed. It was during the transition toward private discussions, when Ronan invited the most senior representatives toward his private council chamber, that Ren felt Fenrir's body tense sharply beside her. She followed his gaze and spotted Edric Thorne moving with deliberate casualness toward the same side entrance where Cassian's guard had positioned himself earlier, a folded piece of parchment visible in his nervous grip. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. Ren moved quickly but carefully, careful not to draw attention as she made her way toward the private council wing, Fenrir and Sable flanking her with the silent, purposeful grace of predators who understood exactly what was needed of them. She reached the corridor just as Edric slipped through a side door, disappearing into the passage that led toward the private chambers, where Ronan would soon be walking. She signaled to the guard stationed nearby, one of the loyal men positioned according to their careful plan, and together they followed at a careful distance, watching as Edric met with two of Cassian's men in the shadowed corridor, exchanging hurried, tense words that Ren strained to catch. "He suspects nothing," Edric was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "The private discussion begins within the hour. Once he's isolated with the visiting representatives, you'll have your opportunity." "And the wolves?" one of the guards asked, glancing nervously toward the corridor, as if expecting Fenrir and Sable to materialize at any moment. "The girl keeps them occupied in the main hall. They shouldn't interfere." Ren felt a flash of cold satisfaction at how wrong that assumption would prove to be. She signaled the loyal guard beside her, and together they moved to alert Ronan immediately, understanding that the assassination attempt was now only minutes away from being set into motion. They found Ronan just as he was preparing to enter his private council chamber, and one look at Ren's face told him everything he needed to know. He excused himself smoothly from the gathered nobles, citing a sudden urgent matter requiring his attention, and followed Ren and the guard back toward a more secure section of the castle, his expression hardening with each step as she quickly relayed everything she had overheard. "They're waiting in the private wing," she finished, "expecting you to walk directly into their ambush within the hour." Ronan's jaw tightened, fury and cold calculation warring behind his eyes. "Then we ensure they find something quite different than what they expect." He moved quickly, summoning his most trusted guards and outlining a revised plan on the spot, one that would allow the assassination attempt to proceed exactly as Cassian's men anticipated, right up until the moment Ronan's loyal forces closed the trap around them instead. It was a dangerous gambit, requiring precise timing and complete trust in everyone involved, but it offered the best chance of exposing Cassian's plan definitively, with enough witnesses and evidence to justify decisive action against him. "I need you to stay with the wolves," Ronan said to Ren, as the guards dispersed to their positions. "Keep them near the main hall, away from the danger, but ready if I need them." "Ronan, please," he said, something raw and honest breaking through his composed exterior for just a moment. "I cannot focus on what needs to happen if I'm worried about you walking into danger alongside me. Trust me to handle this, the way you've trusted me with everything else these past weeks." Ren wanted desperately to argue, to insist on staying close enough to help if something went wrong, but she recognized the fear beneath his request, understood that asking her to stay back was not about doubting her capabilities, but about protecting something that had become precious to him. She nodded reluctantly, though every instinct screamed against letting him walk toward danger without her. "Be careful," she said softly, "please." Ronan's hand found hers briefly, a small, private gesture amid the tension surrounding them. "I intend to be." I have far too much reason to survive this now. He disappeared down the corridor toward the private council wing, moving with the calm, deliberate stride of a king, walking toward an important meeting, giving no outward sign of the danger he knew awaited him. Ren watched him go, her heart pounding with fear she could not entirely suppress, before forcing herself back toward the main hall, where the wolves waited, restless and alert to the tension radiating from her. The next 20 minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Ren pacing near the wolves while trying to maintain some outward appearance of calm, for the benefit of the visiting nobles still mingling in the great hall, unaware of the danger unfolding elsewhere in the castle. She kept glancing toward the corridor Ronan had disappeared into, straining to hear any sound that might indicate what was happening within the private council chamber. Finally, the sound of raised voices and clashing steel echoed faintly from the private wing, and Ren's control shattered instantly. She released the wolves from their restraint, and together they raced toward the sound of conflict, unable to stay back a moment longer, while Ronan faced danger without her. Ren burst into the private council chamber, just as one of Cassian's guards lunged toward Ronan with a drawn blade, only to be intercepted by one of Ronan's own hidden guards, who had been waiting silently behind a tapestry exactly as planned. The room erupted into controlled chaos, loyal guards emerging from their concealed positions to overwhelm the small group of assassins who had believed they were walking into an easy, unguarded ambush. Fenrir and Sable moved through the chaos with terrifying precision, driving back two more of Cassian's men, who attempted to flee through a side passage, their combined presence enough to end any thought of resistance the moment the assassins found themselves surrounded. Within minutes, the brief but violent confrontation ended, Cassian's men disarmed and restrained. Edric Thorne discovered cowering behind an overturned table, his earlier bravado completely collapsed under the weight of his own betrayal being exposed. Ronan stood at the center of it all, breathing hard but unharmed, his sword still drawn as he surveyed the scene with cold, controlled fury. His eyes found Ren immediately, relief flooding his expression the moment he confirmed she was safe, before hardening again as he turned his attention toward the captured conspirators. "Bring Lord Cassian here," he ordered one of his guards. It's time he explained himself to the entire gathering, in front of every witness who came to celebrate what he intended to destroy. Word spread quickly through the castle, and within the hour, the great hall had transformed from a celebratory gathering into something far more serious. Visiting nobles and their guards watching in stunned silence as Lord Cassian Wolf was brought before them, his careful diplomatic mask finally cracking under the weight of undeniable evidence. "This is a misunderstanding," Cassian insisted, though his voice lacked its usual smooth confidence. "My men acted without my knowledge, I assure you." "Your senior guard has already confessed everything," Ronan interrupted, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "The weapons smuggled into my castle, the payment made to Edric Thorne for information about my defenses, the plan to assassinate me during this very gathering, using the confusion of visiting dignitaries as cover." He gestured toward the restrained conspirators, evidence laid bare for every witness present. "Do you truly wish to continue claiming ignorance in front of representatives from 3 neighboring territories who now understand exactly what kind of ally you've proven yourself to be?" Cassian's expression finally crumbled, calculation giving way to something colder and more desperate as he realized the full scope of his exposure. "You cannot possibly prove." "I can, and I have," Ronan said firmly. "And every representative in this hall will carry word of your treachery back to their own territories, ensuring you find no welcome, no alliance, no trade agreement anywhere in these northern lands ever again." The visiting nobles murmured among themselves, shock and outrage rippling through the crowd as the full weight of what had nearly occurred settled over the gathering. Cassian's carefully built reputation crumbled in real time, witnessed by exactly the kind of influential audience that would ensure his downfall spread far beyond Blackthorn Castle's walls. Ren watched from near the wolves, her heart still pounding from the danger of the past hour, as Ronan ordered Cassian and his remaining loyal guards escorted from the castle under heavy guard, stripped of any pretense of honor or diplomatic protection. Edric Thorne, weeping and desperate, was led away separately, his fate left uncertain pending a full accounting of exactly how deeply his betrayal had run. As the great hall slowly emptied, visiting nobles departing to discuss the shocking events amongst themselves, Ronan finally allowed himself a moment of exhaustion, sinking into a nearby chair as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. Ren approached quietly, the wolves trailing beside her, relief and lingering fear both evident in her expression. "You're truly unharmed?" she asked, needing to hear him confirm it directly, despite having already seen him standing whole and unharmed. "Unharmed," Ronan confirmed, reaching for her hand without hesitation this time, uncaring who might witness the gesture. "Thanks entirely to you. Without your warning, without the wolves' instincts, I would have walked directly into that ambush completely unprepared." "We make a good team," Ren said softly, allowing herself to finally relax, now that the immediate danger had passed. "We do," Ronan agreed, something warm and certain entering his voice as he studied her carefully in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. "Ren, I need to say something, and I find I no longer wish to wait for a more appropriate moment, given how close I came today to losing the chance entirely." Ren's heart stuttered, uncertain what to expect, but sensing the significance of the moment building between them. "What is it?" "These past weeks, watching you with my wolves, working beside you through every danger that's arisen, I've come to understand something I spent years avoiding admitting, even to myself." He held her gaze, steadily, vulnerability evident beneath his usual composed exterior. "My wolves recognized something in you from the very first night, something worth trusting completely, worth relaxing their guard for after 100 years of refusing everyone else. I think, perhaps, I recognized it too, though I was slower to admit it than they were." "Ronan," Ren whispered, uncertain how to respond to words she had hoped for, but never truly expected to hear, given every rule and expectation that separated their positions in the world. "I know the difference in our stations creates complications," he continued, pressing forward despite her evident hesitation. "I know my council will have concerns, that tradition suggests a king should look elsewhere for companionship than an Omega servant with no family name to offer. But I find I no longer care as deeply about tradition as I once did, not when weighed against what I've come to feel for you these past weeks." Ren felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she had spent weeks trying to suppress, certain that whatever grew between them could never be more than impossible longing, given the vast gulf separating their positions. "I never expected this," she admitted. "Never allowed myself to hope for something so far beyond what someone like me should reasonably want." "Then allow yourself now," Ronan said gently, reaching up to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Because I find myself wanting this, wanting you, more certainly than I've wanted anything in the 6 years since I took this crown." The wolves, sensing the significance of the moment, pressed close around them both, Fenrir leaning against Ronan's side, while Sable rested her head gently against Ren's leg, as if offering their own quiet blessing to whatever was finally being acknowledged between their two favorite humans, after weeks of careful, unspoken longing. Ren found herself smiling through her tears, something fragile and hopeful blooming in her chest, despite every practical concern still lingering at the edges of her thoughts. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever complications their different stations might create, she found herself, for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Castle, genuinely hopeful about what the future might hold. The weeks that followed brought a strange new peace to Blackthorn Castle, though it was a peace built carefully atop the wreckage of exposed betrayal. Edric Thorne, stripped of his title and lands, was exiled from the Northern Territories entirely, his family's generations of service ending in disgrace that would follow his name for the rest of his life. Word of Lord Cassian Wolf's treachery spread quickly through the neighboring kingdoms, isolating him from any future alliance, and leaving his own territories vulnerable to the consequences of his failed ambition. Ronan did not hide his growing feelings for Ren, despite the whispers that inevitably followed such an unusual pairing. He brought her into council meetings as an advisor whose insight into the wolves, and increasingly into the subtle undercurrents of castle politics, had proven invaluable beyond simple animal handling. Some nobles grumbled about tradition being cast aside, but none dared voice their objections too loudly, not after witnessing firsthand how her instincts had saved the king's life during Cassian's attempted coup. Ren settled into her new position, with the same careful, steady grace she brought to everything else, though the adjustment from invisible servant to trusted companion of the king came with its own quiet challenges. She still caught herself flinching at unexpected attention, still felt the old instinct to disappear whenever eyes turned toward her in crowded rooms, Habits built over a lifetime of learning, that visibility often invited danger rather than safety. "You don't have to keep proving yourself," Ronan told her one evening, finding her anxiously reviewing preparations for an upcoming council session for the third time that day. "You've already proven everything worth proving, many times over." "Old habits," Wren admitted, setting aside her papers. "It's difficult to trust that safety, once found, might actually last." Ronan understood this better than most, having spent his own childhood learning similar lessons about the fragility of trust, the constant vigilance required to survive within a court built on shifting alliances and hidden ambitions. He drew her into a gentle embrace, the wolves settling comfortably around them both, as they had grown accustomed to doing whenever their two humans needed quiet reassurance. "We'll build that trust together," he promised, "for as long as it takes." But peace within Blackthorn Castle, however hard-won, rarely lasted long uninterrupted. Nearly a month after Cassian's exposure and exile, disturbing reports began arriving from the eastern border, whispers of armed movement gathering just beyond the kingdom's edges, too organized and deliberate to be simple bandit activity. Ronan's scouts confirmed the worst of these fears within days, uncovering evidence that Cassian, humiliated and desperate following his failed coup, had begun assembling a mercenary force of his own, determined to seize through open warfare what he had failed to claim through careful betrayal. The news arrived during a quiet morning in the courtyard, delivered by a breathless scout who had ridden through the night to bring word directly to the king. Ronan's expression hardened as he absorbed the report, the peaceful weeks of the past month evaporating instantly beneath the weight of renewed danger. "How many men?" he asked sharply. "Several hundred, my king, gathered from mercenary companies across 3 territories. They march under no official banner, but our informants confirm Lord Cassian funds and commands them personally." The scout hesitated before continuing. "They move toward Blackthorn directly. We estimate they'll reach the castle within 4 days." Wren felt cold dread settle in her stomach as she absorbed the implications. Cassian, stripped of his diplomatic standing and his careful reputation, had apparently decided that open warfare offered his only remaining path toward the throne he had failed to seize through subtler means. Whatever restraint had guided his earlier attempt was clearly gone now, replaced by the desperate ambition of a man with nothing left to lose. "We need to prepare the castle's defenses immediately," Ronan said, already moving toward the war room, his mind clearly shifting into the calculated focus of a commander facing genuine military threat. "Summon Captain Aldrich, and every senior officer. We have 4 days to prepare for a siege we should never have needed to fight." The following days passed in a blur of urgent preparation, the castle transforming from a place of quiet daily routine into a fortress bracing for conflict. Guards drilled extensively in the courtyard, supplies were gathered and stockpiled, and messages were sent to allied territories requesting reinforcements that might not arrive in time to matter. Wren found herself pulled into the frantic preparations as well, her connection to the wolves proving invaluable once again, as Fenrir and Sable patrolled the castle's perimeter, their heightened senses providing crucial early warning of any approaching threat. "They'll use everything they learned during their failed infiltration," Ronan explained during a tense war council meeting, spreading maps of the castle's defenses across the table. "Cassian knows our weak points, our patrol schedules, details he gathered through Edric's betrayal before we discovered it. We cannot assume any of our previous security measures remain truly secret." "Then we adapt everything," Wren said, drawing attention from the assembled officers who had grown accustomed to her presence in strategic discussions, even if some still harbored quiet reservations about an Omega's voice carrying weight in matters of war. "Change patrol patterns, move stored weapons to locations he wouldn't expect, use what he thinks he knows against him." Captain Aldrich, who had grown to respect Wren's instincts considerably since the earlier crisis, nodded in agreement. "A reasonable strategy. Confusion favors the defender, in this case, particularly against a force that believes it holds the advantage of inside knowledge." The plan they constructed over the following days combined careful defensive positioning with unexpected tactical shifts, designed specifically to undermine whatever advantage Cassian believed his stolen knowledge provided him. Ronan pushed his forces hard, determined that Blackthorn Castle would not fall to the ambitions of a man who had already tried and failed once to claim what belonged rightfully to another. On the evening before the mercenary force was expected to arrive, Wren found herself once again standing beside Ronan on the eastern battlements, the same spot where they had first watched distant torchlight herald the beginning of this entire dangerous chapter weeks earlier. The weight of what tomorrow might bring settled heavily between them, neither willing to voice aloud the very real possibility that the coming battle might change everything they had built together. "Whatever happens," Ronan said quietly, his hand finding hers in the cooling darkness, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Ren said immediately. "If the battle turns against us, if the castle's defenses fail, promise me you'll flee with the wolves rather than remaining to fight alongside me." His grip tightened slightly, urgency evident beneath his controlled exterior. "I cannot face what's coming tomorrow, while worrying that you might sacrifice yourself trying to protect me." Ren wanted desperately to refuse, to insist that she would stand beside him regardless of the danger, but she recognized the fear underlying his request, understood that asking for this promise was his own way of finding courage to face the coming conflict. "I promise," she said softly, though every instinct rebelled against the idea of abandoning him to danger while she fled to safety. Ronan pulled her close then, the wolves settling protectively around them both, as they stood together on the battlements, watching the darkness beyond the walls, where danger gathered steadily closer with each passing hour. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, bound by a connection that had grown from 100 years of careful solitude into something neither of them had expected to find, yet both had come to treasure beyond measure. Dawn broke gray and cold over Blackthorn Castle, the mercenary force visible along the tree line as the sun rose, their numbers even greater than the scouts had originally reported. Ronan stood atop the main gate, armor gleaming despite the overcast sky, addressing his assembled guards with the calm, steady confidence of a leader determined to protect what belonged to him, regardless of the odds arrayed against him. Ren watched from a secure position near the inner courtyard, the wolves pressed close beside her, their bodies tense with the same anticipatory energy rippling through the entire castle. She had argued, in the final hours before dawn, for a more active role in the coming defense, but Ronan had remained firm in his request, and she had given her word the night before, however reluctantly. The battle began with the mercenary force testing the castle's outer defenses, probing for weaknesses along the walls, while Ronan's archers held their positions, raining arrows down upon any group that pressed too close. The careful preparations of the previous days proved their worth quickly, defenders anticipating attack patterns that Cassian's forces expected to catch them unprepared for, the element of surprise working in favor of the castle rather than against it. Hours passed in brutal, exhausting conflict, the mercenary force probing different sections of the wall, searching for any gap in the defenses that Edric's stolen knowledge might have promised them. Ren watched anxiously from her position, unable to see Ronan directly, but tracking the ebb and flow of battle through the shouts and movements of guards relaying updates throughout the castle. It was well past midday when disaster nearly struck. A small group of mercenaries, guided by knowledge of an old, rarely used service entrance near the eastern wall, one that Edric had known about, but that Ronan's revised defensive plan had unfortunately overlooked in the rush of preparation, managed to breach the castle's outer defenses through a narrow, poorly guarded passage. Ren felt Fenrir's body go rigid beside her moments before the alarm bells began ringing, his senses catching the intrusion before any human guard had noticed the breach. She understood immediately what was happening, and despite her promise to Ronan, she knew she could not simply stand by while enemies infiltrated the castle's inner sanctum. "Find him," she urged the wolves, releasing them from her side. "Go. Protect him." Fenrir and Sable tore through the courtyard with terrifying speed, and Ren followed as quickly as she could, unable to keep pace with the wolves, but determined to reach wherever the danger was unfolding. She found Ronan moments later, already engaged with the small group of infiltrators near the inner keep, his sword flashing as he defended himself against 3 mercenaries who had clearly targeted him specifically, recognizing that eliminating the king would end the battle far more decisively than any prolonged siege. The wolves arrived just as one of the mercenaries circled behind Ronan, blade raised for a strike he would not have seen coming in time to defend against. Fenrir intercepted the attacker with brutal efficiency, while Sable drove back a second assailant, buying Ronan the crucial seconds he needed to finish his own opponent, and turned to face the remaining threat with his wolves now fighting fiercely beside him. Ren arrived breathless just as the last of the infiltrators fell, the brief but violent confrontation ending as quickly as it had begun. Ronan turned toward her immediately, relief and alarm warring across his blood-spattered face, as he registered her presence so close to danger she had promised to avoid. "You promised." "I promised to flee if the castle fell," Ren said firmly, her heart still pounding from fear and exertion both. "It hasn't fallen, and I couldn't simply stand by while I sensed you were in danger, wolves or no wolves to warn me." Ronan looked as though he wanted to argue further, but the sounds of continued battle beyond the inner keep reminded them both that the larger conflict remained unresolved. The breach they had just repelled only one small piece of a much larger siege still raging around the castle's outer walls. He pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace, gratitude and lingering fear evident in the tightness of his grip, before releasing her reluctantly to return his attention to the ongoing defense. "Stay behind the wolves," he said firmly. "Please. I cannot fight properly while fearing for your safety." Ren nodded. Understanding now was not the moment for further argument, and together they made their way back toward the main defensive positions, the wolves flanking them protectively as the sounds of battle continued to echo across the castle grounds. The tide of battle finally began shifting in the late afternoon, when reinforcements from a neighboring allied territory, summoned days earlier, arrived unexpectedly to strike the mercenary force from behind, catching Cassian's men in a crushing position between the castle's determined defenders and the fresh, unexpected assault from their rear. What had been a grueling, uncertain siege collapsed rapidly into chaotic retreat, mercenaries abandoning their positions as the battle turned decisively against them. Lord Cassian Wolf himself was discovered among the fleeing forces, captured attempting to escape the collapsing assault, before he could be recognized and held accountable for the devastation his ambition had caused. He was brought before Ronan in chains as the sun began setting over the exhausted, battle-scarred castle, his earlier arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by the hollow desperation of a man who had gambled everything and lost entirely. "You could have simply accepted your exile," Ronan said, standing over the defeated lord with cold, exhausted authority. "Lived quietly, kept whatever remained of your dignity intact. Instead you chose this, cost the lives of good men on both sides, all for a throne that was never yours to claim." Cassian said nothing, his silence answer enough to the question of whether any regret existed beneath his shattered ambition. Ronan ordered him held for formal judgment, the details of his fate to be decided through proper process rather than the heat of battlefield anger, a decision that spoke to the same measured wisdom that had guided Ronan through every crisis Ren had witnessed since her arrival at Blackthorn Castle. As night finally fell over the exhausted castle, the immediate danger passed, but the work of recovery only beginning. Ren found herself once again in the familiar courtyard, the wolves resting heavily beside her after a day of fierce, exhausting battle. Ronan joined her there, as darkness settled fully, his armor removed, his exhaustion evident in every line of his posture as he lowered himself down beside her. "We survived," he said quietly, something like disbelief mixed into the relief coloring his voice. "We survived," Ren echoed, leaning into him without hesitation, the formal distance that had once separated them entirely dissolved by everything they had faced together. Together. Fenrir and Sable pressed close around them both, exhausted from the day's fierce fighting, their loyalty proven beyond any lingering doubt through blood and battle, rather than simple quiet companionship. Slowly, gradually, as the adrenaline of the day finally faded into bone-deep exhaustion, both wolves settled fully into rest, their massive heads resting trustingly against Ren's lap, their bodies curled protectively around the woman, who had earned their complete devotion from the very first night she dared approach them. Ronan watched the scene with quiet wonder, understanding now, with complete clarity, everything his wolves had recognized about Ren from that very first encounter, weeks and dangers ago. True loyalty, true trust, was never something that could be commanded or demanded through fear and authority. It had to be earned, patiently and honestly, through gentleness, offered without expectation of anything in return. "They chose you," he murmured, watching his wolves sleep peacefully in her arms, for the first time in 100 years of guarded solitude. "And so, completely and without reservation, have I." Ren smiled softly in the darkness, exhaustion and happiness mingling together as she rested against him, the wolves sleeping soundly around them both. The castle that had once felt so foreign and dangerous now felt entirely like home, Not because of the crown or the title or any position she had never expected to hold, but because of the quiet, steady love that had grown between two people and two wolves, who had all, in their own careful ways, been waiting a very long time to finally let someone close enough to be trusted completely. In the months that followed, Blackthorn Castle rebuilt itself stronger than before, its king ruling with renewed wisdom, earned through hard-won experience, and beside him, an Omega who had once been invisible, now stood recognized and cherished, having proven that gentleness and courage could accomplish what fear and force never could. The wolves who had let no one touch them for 100 years had finally found someone worth trusting completely, and in doing so, had led their king toward the one thing his crown alone could never have given him, a heart no longer guarded, and a home no longer lonely.